Tot seguit, el que parlarem és del context europeu del porta a porta, perquè si hi ha una cosa que és certa, que és que el model més extès són els contenidors oberts, també hi ha un consens sobre que aquest sistema ha tocat sostre i no és tan eficient com necessitaríem i no ens permet assolir aquests nivells creixents de recollida selectiva que ens exigeix Europa ni s'adapta a la creixent generació de residus que estem patint. Però què ens exigeix Europa i per què ens ho exigeix? Per explicar-nos-ho, avui tenim amb nosaltres online, però el tenim amb nosaltres, en William Neale, que és assessor de la Comissió Europea en Economia Circular. Aquesta presentació, que és en línia, recordeu que podeu escoltar la traducció simultània, que podrem fer preguntes al final i que podeu fer també tuits amb el hashtag que us he indicat abans. Doncs amb vosaltres, William Neale.
Well, thank you very much and good morning, everybody. I'm very sorry that I can't be with you physically. I would love to join you there rather than be in cold Brussels. But I wanted to take the opportunity to put things into a very much wider perspective by starting to talk about our approach to circular economy and then bring it more closer to the waste issues and to the Catalan situation. But I wanted to start with a little bit of a sort of history lesson. And I hope that everybody can find the Catalan translation. I'll just try to share my screen with you. Hold on. Let me. I'm having trouble to. Okay. So I'm not sure if you can see my screen. So I wanted to start off with a bit of a history lesson, and basically it's about why we need we need lawyers and we need economists, and we need the legal approach to environment and to waste, and we need the economic approach. Now, if you look at environment policy at European level, it really started only in the 1970s, and from the early 1970s, after a series of environmental catastrophes, we had reams of environmental legislation. We had about 200 regulations in 20 years coming in the 70s and 80s. And it wasn't until 1986 that the Single European Act actually made environment an objective of the European Union in the treaties. It wasn't until 1997 in the Treaty of Amsterdam that sustainable development became an objective of the European Union. And so if you look at what that meant for waste, if this sort of situation in 2010 was basically a very solid and comprehensive range of waste legislation, which has actually since been thinned down a little bit there were actually a lot more waste streams individually dealt with. But if you look at what was going on at the same time globally, as we were developing these swathes of legislation about waste and also about water quality, air quality, all of this legislation really aimed at punishing polluters. It was really sort of setting limits to economic activity and then punishing those who went beyond those limits. At the same time, the global situation was like this in terms of a massive acceleration since the 1970s in our resource extraction and use. So since that time in the early 70s, a threefold increase in our global resource use, so an exponential increase to the extent that it's estimated that by 2050 we'll be using the equivalent of 3 planets. And the environmental impacts of that are enormous when you consider that about 50% of greenhouse gas emissions and about 90% of biodiversity loss are driven by resource extraction and processing. So this is what that looks like at the European level in terms of flows of materials. This is by weight. And you can see here that there are imports coming from outside Europe. These tend to be higher value and lighter in terms of weight resources. So we're talking about fossil fuels and metals and a lot of critical raw materials. Those that we're sourcing within Europe tend to be rather heavier, things like building materials and biomaterials, which actually rot, so they can't be kept for, in many cases, for as long. So those are normally sourced closer to where they're used. But I think that the important thing here is, if you look at the line going along the bottom, recycling is actually a fairly small percentage of that overall picture. Now, we need to increase the amount that we are recycling, and we're trying to do that, and we'll come on to that. But the main message here is that it is far more important to actually slow down that flow of materials through the economy. What we need to do is turn that sort of fast-flowing river of resources, which is going out on the right-hand side in emissions and in waste. We need to slow it down into more of a lake so that those resources, those materials, are staying within our economy for as long as possible, that we're getting as much use out of them. They're embodied in products, they're embodied in buildings, in infrastructure, in other assets. And when those are waste or emissions, they're of no use to us anymore. We need to actually keep them in the economy for as long as possible, and we need to optimize their use. We need to make sure that they're used intensively. And this is what circular economy is all about. It's about recycling, yes, but more importantly, it's about keeping the value in the economy for as long as possible. How do we do that in terms of activities? I'm sure many of you know this diagram from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. It's called the butterfly. You have technical resources on the right-hand side, the right wing, and we have bioresources on the left-hand side. And the fundamental message is that we need to use those feedback loops to keep value in the economy. And the closer you are into the center, the more you're keeping that value in. So recycling there is rather more on the outside. And I think it's important to understand that just keeping that value in is the ultimate objective of circular economy, but also that involves a lot of economic activity in itself. And actually, there are more jobs per ton, if you like, as you're closer to the center than as you get to the outside. Now, what happened in 2020, I think, was fundamental. I guess since 2010, we have been talking at European level about resource efficiency, about circular economy. In 2020, with the new European Commission, the Green Deal really put this at the center of the political debate and at the top level. So the Green Deal became the European Union's growth strategy, and subsequent to the pandemic, it has become our recovery strategy. And circular economy is really at the center of that. And you can see here the impact of circular economy and circular approaches to climate, to biodiversity, to industry, and to pollution are all very much recognized. And so the circular economy action plans which we've brought in are very much delivering on that. The first circular economy action plan was still very much focused on waste legislation, and I guess many of you are dealing with the consequences of this in your own everyday work. So we have pushed the percentages, we've pushed the ambition levels of recycling and of waste prevention and reducing landfill. But I think another important aspect of the first circular economy action plan, because this is what I'm showing now is really about that loop underneath, it's about the recycling. The more groundbreaking aspect of that first circular economy action plan was our plastic strategy. in 2018. And this was groundbreaking because it was very comprehensive. It was the first time we'd taken a value chain or a material, and we had addressed it through different policy tools throughout that value chain. So yes, we actually used legislation to ban certain uses of single-use plastic, where there were good alternatives, whether they're multiple-use alternatives or if it's a different material. But in addition to that, we announced a quadrupling of investment in plastic recycling. We had a pledging campaign with industry to use more recyclates to boost the demand. So there was a series of, if you like, economic tools as well as those sort of basic legal tools there. Now, when we come more recently to our current Circular Economy Action Plan, you can see this reflected. So on the one hand, we're focusing very much on products, and I'll come on to that. But we have decided to address a series of other key value chains. Third, in this sort of overall structure here is, of course, continuing focus on waste, and I'll come on to that a bit more later. And then we have various cross-cutting actions. But I think for this current Circular Economy Action Plan, which was adopted in 2020, the most groundbreaking part of it was this focus on products. Now, I've shown you the sort of global acceleration in resource use. I've shown how that looks at European level in material flows, and I've shown the butterfly of those different activities at the sort of meso level in terms of the feedback loops to keep that value in. If you look at this on the level of the product, when you talk about keeping value in, it's really about making those products last longer by those kind of feedback actions. So repair, reuse, remanufacture, and keeping those products in function for as long as possible. And the key to doing this, of course, we need the repair activities, the remanufacture activities, and so on. But design is really the fundamental determinant of how that product will last and whether it is repairable and recyclable and so on. So we decided to tackle the design phase, and in March this year, on the 30th of March, if everything goes to plan, we will adopt a sustainable product initiative, which is a piece of legislation based on the Eco-Design Directive, which has already been working miracles in terms of energy performance of energy-using goods and energy-using products. We're going to expand the scope of the Eco-Design Directive to cover all kinds of products, from furniture to shampoo, and we're going to apply criteria that go way beyond the energy efficiency in the use phase of the product to look at a wide range of criteria related to circularity. So the durability of the product, the reusability, upgradability, what chemicals are in the product, what substances of value are in the product, and so on. So the intention is to make sustainable products on the European market the norm, because what we're talking about here is single market legislation. We are saying that products that don't meet these criteria will not be allowed to be sold on the European markets. So it's quite a hard-hitting piece of legislation. It's very, as I say, groundbreaking, because we are getting away from that legislative approach to environment in terms of punishing polluters, and we're intervening at the beginning. We're saying, you know, that products have to be designed to be sustainable. Another important part of this is that we're not only making requirements for the physical side of the product, we are making requirements in terms of data. Now, so much of any product these days, so much of its value is related to the data that comes with it. The information that you have about the product really determines the viability of a lot of repair actions, whether you keep a product or not, whether you can get spares, whether you know how to dismantle it, whether you know what's in it when you recycle it. But for nearly all products at the moment, that data is generally lost as the product makes its journey through the economy. So our objective through the Sustainable Products Initiative will be to have requirements on access to data about that product. So on the one hand, each product will be required to have a unique identifier, a kind of tag, which can be scanned, which can be optically readable, and linked via a kind of URL, a kind of link from that identifier will be information, and we will specify what information would be required to be provided by the person putting that product on the market. Now, that will differ, of course, whether it's a piece of furniture or a bottle of shampoo, the kind of information which is relevant. So we're talking about a process here of identifying that information. And also, of course, we have to be very aware of the balance between intellectual property and data access, but there are ways around that. And you can already see the first example of this coming through in the batteries regulation, which is really dealing with industrial batteries and electric vehicle batteries. And that was adopted by the Commission just a year ago and is now being negotiated between the member states and the European Parliament. And in that regulation, you see the kinds of data which we say should be made available from business to government, from business to consumer, and from business to business. So that's the Sustainable Products Initiative. This is also happening in the context of other approaches towards sustainable production and consumption. So we're talking also about introducing a right to repair, whereby consumers will be able to go beyond the normal minimum legal guarantees to have stronger commercial guarantees and legal guarantees. And we're talking about a green claims initiative, whereby any product which says that it's green or that it's eco will have to be able to substantiate that with a proper life cycle footprinting methodology behind it. There are, we have eco label, we have green public procurement, we're reinforcing these tools. So this is a panoply, a variety of tools which we're using. And as I said, the Circular Economy Action Plan does focus on key value chains. We continue to work on plastics, but we're working on other value chains which have a major environmental impact and where there is big potential. And our Sustainable Product Initiative will initially focus on those value chains when we're establishing the criteria for products. Also, as I say, the Sustainable Products Initiative is about what is the minimum that we allow on the European market. We're also working at the top end, at the top runner, to encourage the best. And through the taxonomy process, which you may have heard of probably more recently in relation to nuclear power and gas, but we are working on introducing into the taxonomy technical screening criteria for what can be considered as being a substantial contribution to circular economy in various economic activities. So this will help to define which activities could be eligible for preferential financing, for green financing and green bonds. So it's a very hotly debated piece of work. So that is the bigger picture in terms of the history of environment policy, in terms of the development of circular economy, the attention to products, the attention to value chains. Where does that leave us with waste policy today? Now, the watchword, the priority in the Circular Economy Action Plan today is waste prevention. And if the waste can't be prevented, then we're looking at maximizing the amount of value, the sort of residual value that we get from that waste, and also to minimize the impacts of that waste on the environment. And as I say, most of the value of the materials that we use is lost by the time it becomes waste. So we're really trying to prevent waste. But maximizing its economic value when it does become waste is really about separate collection. I remember meeting two mayors of two different cities in Europe, which I won't mention the names of, a few years ago. And within about 2 weeks, one of them was a mayor of a city in Sweden who said, we have a big problem with waste. People keep stealing it because it's so valuable, because they were stealing the valuable sections of the waste. And then we had the mayor of an Italian city came to see us 2 weeks later, saying we have a big problem with waste. We can't deal with it. We've got too much of it, and it's not treatable because it was mixed. So I think the message is that separation of waste, as you will be aware, is key to whether that waste is valuable or not. Now, I think legislation is still important, and it's still driving improvements throughout Europe in our treatment of waste. And the review that we undertook in 2018 is still ongoing. We're still implementing many of the things that were brought in that 2018 review. And you can see here that there are many things coming up in the next couple of years. We're going to be very busy on refining those approaches to waste. We're also working on reviewing other areas. The Waste Shipment Directive has just been reviewed. We just tabled that a couple of weeks ago in order to make sure that waste is treated as best possible, that it's not illegally exported. We're working also on a review of the End-of-Life Vehicle Directive coming up. As you know, as I just mentioned, we're working on batteries. So we are continually reviewing the waste legislation, and that is important. But the implementation challenges are still there. This is a little bit of an old slide, but it's really there just to show you that the reality in terms of implementation, here it's in terms of the 50%, the old 50% recycling target. The reality across member states is vastly varied. It does show what you can potentially achieve, but it shows that there is a long way to get there. And I think that the lesson there is that the reality is diverse, but it does show what can be done. And if we look at the reasons for the differing performance of those member states, here we, as you may know, we looked at all of the member states that weren't going to meet their 2020 waste targets in what we call the early warning mechanism. And the lessons that we learned from those that were achieving the targets were very similar in every case. Now, I think that what Catalonia has done incredibly successfully, and is really a model which we certainly used to inspire other regions around Europe, is to introduce those charges on landfill and other forms of residual waste treatment. And I know that in Catalonia, you've also actually been using that stick as a carrot also by making sure that those funds go to investment in the regions in terms of the infrastructure and the recycling facilities. So I think there the Catalonians have done extremely well. But we need also, as I said, to really get the separate collection and the door-to-door collection working. And as I said, the legal side needs to work with the economics, and things like extended producer responsibility schemes are a means of really internalizing the externalities and making sure that there is an incentive for putting on the market more recyclable products and packaging. Another big issue is administrative capacity, of course, and here it's very important to really have the technical support and also the financial support, and tap into that wherever possible. So I'll leave it there. I think that I'll be very happy to answer any questions. I think that we see that separate collection has been obligatory since 2015 already for many materials, for glass and textiles, for glass and metal and plastic and so on. It will become obligatory also for bio-waste at the end of next year. We're talking the end of December 2023, that bio-waste will have to be collected separately, and 1 year on from that, the textile collection will be a legal requirement, a separate collection. So the challenges are increasing, and as I say, Catalonia has made a great deal of progress so far. It's really been a model and an inspiration to other areas, but I think to move on to get above those sort of rates that Catalonia is at now really involves not only this sort of charging system, but also getting the collection right. So I'll leave it there, and I'm very happy to try to field any questions that people might have. Thank you.
Thanks to you, William Neale, for being here with us. I don't know if there are some questions here. Hi ha preguntes aquí a la sala? Hi ha algú que vulgui aprofitar aquest moment únic de fer-li al William alguna pregunta? Us passaran un micròfon correctament desinfectat, no us preocupeu per res. Aprofiteu perquè marxarà, desconnectarà. Si no, mirarem també si hi ha preguntes al xat de la gent que està online. Mentrestant us ho penseu.
Des del xat demanen si podria donar exemples de ciutats europees que hagin abordat el tema de la gestió de residus d'una manera creativa. So, could you provide, please, some examples of European cities that have tackled the waste problem in a creative way?
There are many, I'm sure. I can't think of any that come to hand immediately. I think if you look at the top runners in places like Flanders, you're seeing that they are moving towards very much more granular separation of waste, and even towards some technological solutions, such as the use of artificial intelligence. So if, for example, you're looking at electrical and electronic equipment coming in to a recycling center, having cameras that can recognize the make and model of that piece of equipment and sort it, and to be able also to divert that for repair and reuse, because in so many cases those kinds of products fail for one or two reasons. If you take a washing machine, more than 50% of washing machines fail because of the bearings or the electronics. And if you're able to identify specific machines and know that those spare parts are available, then you can divert that to repair and reuse. So there are some very innovative sort of far-reaching approaches at the top end, but I think those are in places where they've already got the basics right. So they've got the systems in place for separate door-to-door collection and for basic recycling.
Més preguntes?
Yeah.
Mira, ens en fan arribar més. Per exemple, la nova normativa sobre ecodisseny afectarà només els productes fabricats a Europa o afectarà a tots els productes que es venguin a Europa i vinguin fabricats de fora?
Yes, extremely good question. It will affect products sold in Europe coming from anywhere. So we're really harnessing the collective consumer power of the 450 million consumers in Europe to define what kind of products we want on our markets. But producers all over the world will have to comply with those minimum requirements. I don't expect them to be hundreds of requirements. Like I said, a washing machine, there are two main reasons why most of them fail. So if we are able to intervene just on those two, then we've already got those big low-hanging fruit. And we need to work, I think, also globally with the standards for interoperability, for data, for things like the digital product passport, and to make sure that our global partners are able and aware of what is coming up and that they're involved in the process. And we're working through our global resource efficiency and circular economy work. We have many other countries that are involved with us at global level now, including India, Canada, Japan, Korea, Nigeria, South Africa, Colombia. We have big economies around the world that are already working with us to push circular economy. But of course, those different regions of the globe have different relative resource richness. So not all of them are really in the same interests as us, but we're still working towards this common challenge of dealing with that great acceleration that I explained.
Thank you. Una altra pregunta. Quina és la posició o la postura de la Unió Europea respecte al porta a porta? I think it's called door to door in English, correct? I quins països s'hi han adherit últimament? Els últims, potser.
To tell the truth, I don't have any statistics on that, and I think I would have to ask my colleagues that are dealing with the implementation of the waste legislation directly to answer that. I'd be very happy to do so. I think we're very clear in the studies that I've read that separate collection and door-to-door collection are key to effective separation and recycling. And I think that one opportunity which I would like to suggest here for the future is the TAIEX peer-to-peer program. We have a program in Europe which is aimed at bringing together municipalities, regions, and national administrations for mutual learning and to share experience. And I think that door-to-door collection would be a very legitimate and useful thing on which this could be, this kind of information and experience could be shared. And I think this should be supported through the TAIEX peer-to-peer program. So I would suggest that you look into that and see if we can identify other municipalities around Europe that are doing it successfully or would like to, then we shouldn't make the mistakes that others have made, and we should learn from the good examples.
Aquí tinc una pregunta, agraïment. Moltes gràcies per la presentació, ha estat molt interessant. I diu que li agradaria saber com aborda el problema de la reducció de residus en un món en què l'obsolescència programada és el més habitual. La normativa obligarà a quina durada s'han de disposar peces de recanvi d'electrodomèstics, per exemple, o quants anys el fabricant ha de disposar de peces de recanvi?
Yes, this is exactly what we're trying to do through the design requirements. As I say, design really determines how long a product can last. And we're looking also at, for example, we have been doing studies on repairability. So we have an index of repairability for different kinds of products, which our Joint Research Centre has been working on. And this includes things like software, the updatability of software, and whether you can use a computer which was produced 3 or 4 years ago with new software or not. And these are very relevant. So certainly in terms of the design of the product, but also things like the right to repair will bring this in. It's very key that spare parts would have to be made available for a certain amount of time. The instructions for dismantling and for repairing would need to be made available. And this would have to be done on a product group by product group basis. but these are very much the kind of things that we're looking to have requirements on in the Sustainable Product Initiative through eco-design.
No sé si hi ha preguntes aquí a la sala. Algú...
Una ràpida aquí.
Molt bé.
La faccio in inglese, si sta bene, o la faccio in català, o traduïm, si m'ascolta. Hi William, I'm Michele from Italy. I have a question for you. As you know, the European Commission is setting high recycling targets, which means high quality. Do you think the European Commission will be able to support municipalities in measuring this quality of recycling? Because it's quite difficult for them, doing waste characterization and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the diagram that I showed of the material flows was all about quantity, but quality is the crucial thing which was missing there. And when we talk about value, quality is crucial. When you talk about the demand for recyclates and the kind of pledging that we were encouraging for plastics, a lot of the issue there, I mean, there was a willingness to use recyclates. One issue is the price between virgin and recycled, but it's the quality which was really an important issue. And I mean, as you know, for certain materials, we've introduced end of waste criteria. We had problems with other materials like paper. We didn't manage to do that. That was thrown out by the European Parliament. But even if it is sometimes difficult to establish those criteria, there is a kind of recognition that we do need to still keep on looking at end of waste criteria to say when a pile of a material stops being waste and then becomes a material again, and to set criteria which are meaningful for that. But I think that this is also very much driven by the economics, because on the demand side, if you're not able to produce recyclates, whether it's bio waste or plastics or whatever, of a reasonable quality, then the demand won't be there. And I think I'm hoping that we would be able to help through funding and research in that sense, but in the legislative sense, I think the end of waste criteria are perhaps the only practical way in which we can do that.
Algú més té alguna pregunta més per fer? Sembla que no. Allà darrere?
Bon dia. Jo voldria saber què caracteritza els models d'èxit de porta a porta a les ciutats europees i si hi ha algunes característiques comunes en els que no han funcionat.
Again, on this, I would have to defer to the experts. I'm unable really to provide you with good examples because this isn't my specialist area. As you gathered, I'm working rather on the general circular economy action plan and its objectives. But I think I understand that you have some speakers coming from some other cities and regions after me who are probably far better able to give you some idea of what's worked for them. So I think that's probably a good segue, a good connection to the next speakers from my rather broad approach to look at some of the more specific examples which are really useful for you in applying door-to-door collection.
Podria ser que hi hagués algú més?
Bon dia. Disculpa. La meva pregunta és, hi ha un criteri comú de mesurar la recollida selectiva? Cadascú utilitza el seu propi criteri? Hi ha intenció d'establir criteris comuns? Això és tot.
I didn't really understand the question there. You mean criteria for separate collection, or basically we have a very a rather cumbersome system for collection of data on collection rates, which dates back to the legislation from the 1970s, 1980s. 1990s, which is going through the national statistical authorities to Eurostat. And like I said, the legislation that we were developing those decades ago was really about punishing polluters, and in a sense, it is about fining member states that don't meet those legally binding recycling targets. Now we have recycling targets for the different components, whether it's paper, glass, and so on. But by the time we're able to actually go to court and impose fines, we're several years down the road. And actually, it's far more useful and effective to avoid that situation. It makes a lot more sense to actually help member states and regions to get to the right recycling rates for those different materials than to fine them for not doing it later. And this was the thinking behind the early warning mechanism, which we brought in the 2018 review. And I just put up the lessons learned from that. So it is a very blunt way of measuring the recycling rates for those materials. I think that we have the technology now for real-time data on waste flows. We can really know far more what's happening, and that should help us in, particularly if we have things like the digital product passport, where we will have much more information about what materials are in products, what hazardous materials and substances of high concern are in products as well, to make recycling work better. That kind of real-time data, I think, is far more useful than what we're doing with this very formalized reporting by member states in terms of the overall recycling rates. So we have information, but I think maybe it's not the most useful information. And I think that technology is driving ahead far more quickly.
¿Era això el que volies? No.
No era esta mi pregunta, pero gracias igualmente. Quiero decir si hay criterios comunes para medir, criterios estadísticos. Esas gráficas se hacen en base a unos criterios estadísticos que reportan los países. ¿Todo el mundo reporta los números con el mismo criterio o lo que para unos es 5, para otros es 15?
On the waste figures, we have formal submission of statistics. If we're talking about the material flows, these are done much more through analysis, not based on formal statistics. And I think that there's some interesting work being done now on applying the same methodologies at a regional level. And the European Union has funded recently some projects to do that analysis. So I think it's very interesting in terms of the industrial ecology of a region. If you know what materials are flowing through that region, then you can really define where you want to invest in terms of using those best. But the waste data is really formally reported by the member states.
Algú més? Doncs, thank you, William, for being with us today. Gràcies per haver estat amb nosaltres.